Introducing award-winning producer, activist, an actor that's been over 40 films. A big soulful welcome to Nandita Das. Watched all your movies, but also just been so interested in the kind of social impact part as well.
I did my master's in social work. I was very happy working with an NGO that worked with women and young girls, and I thought that's what I was going to do all my life. And then fire sort of literally fell into my lap. It was the first film that talked about a relationship between two women, but I realized how bold it was only when we started being attacked and theatres were vandalized and all of that, and it triggered so much conversation. So I've been working, like I said, on gender issues for long. If I was speaking at a college and girls' college or something, and some girl would raise her hand and say, "How come you're so confident despite being dark?" And I'd be like, wow. To be able to understand other people's fear is a powerful thing that I feel films can do.
Introducing award-winning producer, activist, an actor that's been over 40 films, first Indian inducted into the International Hall of Fame of the International Women's Forum in Washington, D.C., a Yale World Fellow, served on the jury of the world's most prestigious film festivals. Oh my gosh. A big soulful welcome to Nandita Das.
Thank you,
I'll pretend I've got an audience here. Woo! Oh my gosh. I've got to say, I'm not just excited, but I feel truly honored to have you on. I've watched your work, watched all your movies, but also just been so interested in the kind of social impact part as well that has always been a big thread of the work that you do. When I kind of started this whole feel it in your soul moment, it kind of was stemmed from I suppose my own kind of journey, that I kind of realized there were these times where you have a moment where something is speaking to you inside and then you feel compelled to go and do it. And I'm always interested in kind of working a little bit further back than that and finding out a little bit more about those formative years that kind of brings out those stories later on. So tell me a little bit about young Nandita.
Well, I grew up in Delhi. My father is from Orissa, my mother from Gujarat. There are two, one from the east, one from the west India. So grew up with different languages, with different ethos. My mother was from Bombay, what we used to call it Bombay then, and now it's Mumbai. So that was a big city, bigger than Delhi. And my father came from a small hometown, like a small town. So, I had the pond and the fishes and the farm at one end and this big cosmopolitan city at the other. So every summer holidays was 1 month here and 1 month there. And grew up in a school that was very much in sync with the kind of worldview and, the ideas that I had at home. Thankfully, before I knew words like secularism and feminism and inclusion and diversity and all of those, before I knew the words, thankfully my parents were practicing it at home. So, and that's more natural before you even know the vocabulary, you just live it, and that becomes your normal. Yeah, and there was a lot of space to question, to do what you really love doing. There was no money talk. There were words like career and success were never used, and so it was. I mean, now when I look back, I feel maybe it was a bit of a different, maybe what we call unconventional upbringing. But while growing up, for me, that is what was natural. And my father is a painter, mother a writer. So, grew up a lot around
very artistic kind
arts, but they had nothing to do with films. In fact, we had a television sort of 8 years after everybody else had.
It sounds like it was a very nurturing, nourishing kind of childhood, which allowed you to probably even have space to dream and think and creatively think. When did you start kind of thinking, I'm quite interested in the arts, in drama? Was that kind of a line that was coming through quite early on, or is that something that developed later on?
Actually, I never thought I would be an actor. I did participate in plays. I learned Odissi dance, which is a classical Indian dance form. I learned it for 12 years. I did a bit of music. But all that was not to become an actor or a dancer or a musician. It was just to have a more rounded growth and, just to be exposed to different things. And because of my father being painter, all his friends were, either architects or musicians or photographers or other painters, etc. but it was not really to be an actor. I totally stumbled upon acting. I did my master's in social work. I was very happy working with an NGO that worked with women and young girls, and I thought that's what I was going to do all my life. I did community work. I used to go to the slums of Delhi, and so we used to do various workshops, and I thought that's what I was going to do. And then fire sort of literally fell into my lap. This film made by Deepa Mehta, and it became then later a part of a trilogy, Fire, Earth, Water. So I acted in Fire, and then, it led to other projects. And it was the first film that talked about a relationship between two women, which was kind of unheard of in our films, and definitely much less talked about even in the public space than it is now. So, and then I did other films, and then I started realizing that Bollywood definitely wasn't really for me, because my parents didn't watch it. They didn't expose me and my brother to mainstream cinema. So we didn't grow up watching it. So obviously there was no desire to be in it. And at that time, there was a clearer division between parallel cinema, as we called it then, and, more mainstream cinema. And I, in fact, grew up in college. That's when I was introduced to films, and it was straight to more independent cinema. All my friends watched that, and that's what I got introduced to. So I think even when I started acting, I very naturally, instinctively sort of was drawn to more realistic stories and stories of marginalized people, and, characters that I felt also resonated with me and the work that I did on issues of women and inclusion and all of that. So so it sort of, I very organically started acting, and my social work then sort of morphed into what we call social advocacy. At that time, that word also wasn't so popular, but and they kind of started feeding onto each other, because the acting work took me to different places.
It's quite interesting.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say it's quite interesting because you don't, especially when you kind of see mainstream Bollywood movies, some of the subject matters that have been covered, it's something that, the first independent movie that I actually kind of watched was Fire.
Okay.
And I remember watching that thinking, funnily enough, we used to have a video shop when I was younger.
Yeah, we grew up with videos and then DVDs.
Yeah, exactly. So it was the first time I watched something, and I literally was like, I've never watched a movie covering that kind of content, but even the way it was shot, even the way it looked, it just like kind of people living in a, just how you see India. Exactly. Like that was never portrayed. Yeah. You'd always see these big staircases and, all sorts of stuff, and like living rooms that you go, who lives in a house like that? So it was the first time that I ever saw that. And it's really interesting when you tell me that you studied kind of and worked within the whole kind of social aspect, social care, worked within the slums of Delhi, that somehow, and I don't know if that was a kind of a soulful kind of direction that you were being led with, but the movies that you chose or that chose you, however it worked, kind of almost had a parallel in terms of the interest that you had. And that's got to be a real magical thing for somebody who is
but it's also a choice, right? It's you get various things. I did open the arena. I was getting also mainstream roles, and everyone said that, you're being too picky, and all good actors also do mainstream cinema. Your impact will be greater if you did more commercial films. You'll be more visible. That fame will help you also, the causes that you care for. But then I thought, I don't know if I'll be the same person. I don't know if I would want to do the rest of the work that I do. And more than that, I just sort of instinctively gravitated, like I said, towards sort of more cinema.
Did you feel that that you kind of do you feel like there was a point that you thought, I'm going to choose more of this, or was it that you kind of just instinctively
I think it was more instinctive, and then also then it became also a more conscious choice. But primarily, I think I just instinctively was drawn to those kind of films, and then because there weren't that many made in Hindi. It's tough also, because your big pond has so many sharks with all these big films. It's more difficult to make an independent film where there are so many, because finally you have to distribute through the same channels, you have to show them in the same theaters, and where is that space? In fact, that's what brought me to sort of doing more regional films, even in languages that I didn't speak. So I've now done films in 10 different Indian languages,
Yeah.
and many of them I don't speak at all. I mean, now I know smatterings of some of the South Indian languages, which doesn't have their root enough in the languages that I'm more familiar with. But there were better stories, people had more conviction. I felt they were compromising less. And I did do two films in Bombay that I felt were they were more mainstream for me, but for them that was more independent. So I guess it's a matter of perception. But
Yeah.
for instance, a film called Aks, which was with Mr. Bachchan, where I'm playing his wife, and there was another film called Pita, which was with Sanjay Dutt. I was playing his wife in that, and so they were. For them, it was like a different kind of a film, but for me, it was much more mainstream. And
Yeah.
it wasn't just the film, but at least at that time, there was an inherent hierarchy in the industry, and even now it exists, but maybe it's changed a bit with new people questioning it, and generally the conversation that have been happening. But it was so hierarchical, and I was, as a lead actor, you're always at the top end of the hierarchy. And my social work experience and exposure was all about democratizing everything. And here I had to sort of, have different food, have a different van. A person would stand, with an umbrella in that heat. The junior artist would be all barefoot, and I would be in my shoes. And, so all these little things started bothering me. And I was like, this world is just not for me. So I continued to live in Delhi, which is where I worked and did my films, because it was a neutral ground. There were no films being made there. And, I could just go to any part of the country and shoot there and come back. So I never really moved to Bombay till very recently, and that too for more matters of the heart than films.
So, so on that, I think it's also just kind of nice to see that highlighted in somebody who's had a body of work that they can look back on, for kind of young actors and actresses that are starting out, that there is finding your voice. I've got to say, it took me a while to find my voice,
all of us.
to have courage to have my voice. There's kind of having your voice, and then you kind of look back and you go, where are the moments where I done something that was really aligned to me, and other times where I've kind of gone off track. And I think for me, like, it took me a little bit of time to get there. And I think when you listen to people who've made, say, movies or whatever line of work that they've gone into, but they've kind of had this kind of thread of, there's something inside me that feels aligned to this aspect.
Yeah.
You don't know what those dots are that are going to join up at that time, right? But in that moment, you are gravitating towards that. And that's when you can look back and feel like, hey, I can look back at my work with, a degree of integrity and kind of, and that I wasn't kind of feeling like compromised in those positions, which at times you were probably faced with moments where it could have been.
Yes.
But there was something stronger. And I think, upbringing and having that ability to not feel that everything waited on you making a hit show and your value being, it needs to be a movie that makes this much. And I think that's one of the things, I think, culturally as well. It's interesting to see that you weren't brought up in this kind of like, it needs to be this, it needs to hit this.
Not
because
at
when
all.
you're
the other extreme, in fact.
Yeah, because I think when you're faced with that, when you're not hitting that ideal, you're not going, oh, well, I'll find another movie or I'll find another job. You find yourself kind of almost fighting for, where are you going to find that value?
I think also if you invest in the journey and you're sort of not invested in the goal, because also I didn't know what I really wanted to do. I mean, till very recently, and as recently as 6 months, all of these, like acting and direction was something, direction was, I just felt compelled to tell these stories, so I said them, and acting was also more of an interest. It brought together my interest in wanting to communicate, share, be part of stories, all of that. So it's only very recently I felt like, oh, this is what I really like doing, and maybe I should do more, So when you're really invested in the journey, also, I think you lose the fear of failure. And once you lose the fear of failure, then, you can take risks. It's not even a risk. You're just like, oh, this is a new experience. Let me try this out. Okay, this didn't work out. Like, there are so many films that I'm not so proud of. I mean, there are in my 40 films, I would say 10 films. I wish I hadn't done it. But the good thing is that I did it for the right reasons. You know, as an actor, you're such a small part of it actually, and you control so little that if it may not turn out the way you had imagined it to be, but that doesn't mean, but you at least did it because you thought the story said something that resonated with you, or, you know, the character you felt you wanted to be part of that story, or you related to the character, or whatever. So you did it for the right reasons. It didn't turn out the way you imagined, and that's fine. You still can sleep well, and you can your conscience is still clear, you know. So I think it's really, for me, it's really important to sort of commit to journeys as opposed to saying, okay, what is this going to lead me to? Because we anyway don't know what it's going to lead you to. So, you know, it just opens doors, and then at every path you open one door, and that leads you to another choice. And, you know, so between free will and determinism, you bumble away with life.
Naturally, a lot of us are kind of like very much geared towards the end result. And I think when you can let go of that,
you know, because everyone's
the framework that we're in,
the definition of success, like it has to be quantitative, it has to be measured in money and fame and salary and now followers and likes and whatever it may be. You know, they've made it all very quantitative, whereas life is really.
How do you think for somebody who is like, you know, because, you know, I think I've kind of got to a place where you kind of start to realize there are frameworks that you work in, operate in, that sometimes you realize didn't belong to you, that it might be societal, it might be, you know, part of the time you're living in, it might be family-wise. And as you get older, you know, you kind of go, hang on a second, I'm not sure if that's even something that I believe in. How do you get to it sounds like something that's a natural state to you. But what advice would you give to kind of get yourself more into the journey and less about trying to be striving to go, I need to accomplish this, I need to get to this, which also I think, I don't know, for me, it has been quite a kind of family thing as well, where everybody's like, what grades did you get? So totally everyone's always asking about the end result, and nobody's going, did you enjoy it? How did you have fun while you did it? Did you learn from the experience? What kind of advice would you give in terms of getting yourself into that mindset?
Yeah, I mean, in that sense, I was very privileged, I must say, that, you know, I was never asked those questions. I did my bachelor's in geography, and while everybody raised their eyebrows, my parents were like, why do you want to do it? I was like, I have a really good teacher in geography. I really love the subject. And that's the only reason. Like, nobody asked me, what will you do after that? It's another matter that I didn't want to continue with geography because I didn't like it after my bachelor's. And I was like, I don't know what to do next. And I want to take a year off. I want to go and teach in a school. So I went to a J. Krishnamurti, a lovely school in the south, and I taught there for 4 months. So yeah, I mean, in that sense, I would just say that it's a shift in the head. You know, when you hear all these other voices that are sort of telling you, to what end do you want to do this? What's going to come out of it? You know, and you are then ready to even do something that you don't enjoy in the hope that the end result will be good. But if you invest in what you're doing, it's a cliche, but, you know, you love what you do and do what you love, then you're more in sync with it. And then something good has to come out of it because you've given it your best. So, and sometimes we don't try out different things because we're so worried we won't perform well. I'm not a great singer, so I can't really sing, so I won't even try. You know, maybe I'll just find that joy in singing or whatever that may be, you know. We always want to, also this whole thing of specialization. What are you excelling in? What are you great at? You know, what's that one passion? Why does it have to be? I think specialization is highly overrated. I love doing different things, and, you know, I will do different things, and I may not excel in all of them. But if that's my personality, if you know your calling and this is that one thing you want to do, great. I'm not judging that. Maybe that you have that goal and you want to go there, great. But still you can enjoy the journey. You may still want to reach there. But, you know, there are so many factors that are anyway outside our realm of control or whatever, you know. There are so many factors that have their own plans. So anyway, you don't know what the end goal is. So you might as well, I mean, whichever way you hack it, I think it's just important to be able to love what you do in that moment. So if I'm doing this podcast
Absolutely.
right now, it's the most important thing for me right now. How many people are
I,
going to
I
watch it, what is going to happen, like, it's also, it's humbling because it's one drop in the ocean anyway. So the minute you realize that you are actually so small and insignificant in the larger scheme of things, you stop taking yourself so seriously that everything I do has to be something earth shattering or monumental or recognized by others, and all those pressures we take on ourselves. So you start living more
yeah.
authentically because none of that is the reason why you do something. And that frees you up, I think. It liberates you from those pressures. And then you can discover and you can fall and you can get up and, you can try out things and you're good at some and you're not and it doesn't matter.
I've watched Farag, Manto, Fire. I love those movies. I went to go and watch Zwigato, which I absolutely loved.
Oh, when did you watch it?
So
Because it's still not on OTT and I'm
I
happy about
watched
that.
it in, I think it was in Feltham, just
Oh,
a cinema just right on the
right.
outskirts of London. In fact, I went to the cinema by myself. I met my mum and dad there and my aunt and uncle. They all had like a big bag with like jar in there and like lots of snacks. I was going, Mum, you're not allowed to bring that in. Anyway, and we were so excited, obviously, because we was going to see Couple in the
Yes.
movie. And I said to Couple after
You're
I watched
related
it,
to
I was
him,
like,
right?
yes, he's my cousin.
Oh,
Yeah,
nice.
he's my
Okay.
cousin. I said to Couple, that's the movie that I've been waiting for you to be
Yeah.
in, because I
I'm
don't
glad
feel
you
that
told him
anyone's.
that.
I don't feel that anyone's seen that side of you where. I just thought that real unassuming, but that the acting was humbling.
Natural.
It was just there to
Yeah.
tell the story, and it was a beautiful story at that. And I think one of the things that I always felt that the first time I came to India was when I was 24, and I actually came to see Couple. Was one of the places that I went to, and so I've seen that story unfold for Couple, which is why I wanted
Right.
to speak to him about that whole journey.
He shared that with
But
me
I
as
also
well, and it's quite an amazing
it,
journey. Yeah.
it's a very beautiful story, and he's always been very, very humble about his whole,
Absolutely. He's
he's
very
always, Angelee,
grounded.
it's nothing. I did nothing. Don't worry, I did nothing. But I kind of also remember when I came, it was my first time. And I realized everything that I watched, having a video shop that had Bollywood movies, was nothing like what I saw in real life. When I watched Fire or when I watched your movies Vigato, there is this thing that I feel from you about telling the everyday story that is going on around us, and you are able to capture all those moments that the story that's happening in Zwigato, your food that gets delivered, and you don't think for a second about the infrastructure that's around it, the person who's bringing to your food. What compelled you to kind of tell those types of stories, or what kind of inspires you almost to tell those types of stories?
Well, like I said, I stumbled upon acting and then direction, and so the things that I already cared about in the work I used to do before, or what I saw around myself, it was just like I had another medium. I felt it was such a privilege to have this other medium to tell those stories. I've also been impacted by the books I've read, the films I've watched, so stories are powerful. And while films can't create revolutions, I think they can create a sense of empathy, and, they can trigger certain thoughts, and they can challenge your prejudices and biases, and, in a very subtle, in a kind of almost subliminal way. And that's why they are powerful, because you don't even know that it's impacting you, that you're carrying something. What you and I are, maybe in our core, we are the same, we were the same 20 years ago, but we are not the same because of all those experiences and all those exposures that have found their way into our subconscious. And we know it because our responses to the same things maybe are different today. So I just think that people around me, the things that I see, that I observe, that I go through, whether it's the social predicament of people, whether it's, how people interact with each other. Fear. I mean, in all my films, there is some connection between the ones I've directed, especially Firak, Manto, and Zagato. I think I like to explore why people feel fear. And I feel when you understand someone's fear, then you create a natural empathy for them, at a human level, even if they are the other, if you understand their vulnerabilities. So whether it's in Firak, the fear that characters felt of the violence that had ensued before that, whether in Manto it was the fear, as a Muslim writer in Bombay, what he was going through just after partition and why he had to move to Lahore, or in Zwigato, the fear of losing a job, the fear of not getting enough incentive, not being able to grapple the world of, ratings and all of that. So I think to be able to empathize, to be able to understand other people's fear is a powerful thing that I feel films can do. And I always like
Absolutely.
to explore that. And for me, it's those little things. My films are never too dramatic, and they're not about big things. And,
the little details.
Yeah, it's just about those little nuances and those little things that create maybe a loss of dignity, that creates fear, that creates joy, whatever it may be, So it's about, because most of our lives are about those little things, and they do impact us. And films can show us those little things. But, largely in our Indian films, we are so used to drama. We are so used to big things happening that sometimes I wonder whether people will even like the kind of films I make, because they're so used to heightened emotions. And, whether this would even resonate with them. But, we're not so unique. There are enough people like us, and, and they may be less in numbers,
Absolutely.
but I think in terms of absolute numbers, they're still enough.
I absolutely agree with you. I think also for me, I came away with two kind of feelings. One was the light that is shone on the people around you that are doing so much that sometimes go unnoticed. And I think the little things like the frustration of one thing going wrong with the app and getting a bad review. Like literally I was sitting there going, no, don't write him a bad review, please. And you just realize what the ripple effect, like you just realize, that ripple effect to that person, done so much down, like his day, and when he came home to his wife, and you just go, wow, this is like people's livelihood. And I think it really shone a light on that, the nuances, as you say. And then also I think, the privilege that you have, I think that really make you, when you sit there, you kind of go, wow, you have to kind of actually understand and acknowledge the privilege that you are in, and think about some of the things.
Huge amount. And we forget, we take it for granted, and all of us do that. We talk about it, but in the moment we forget. We still complain, we still compare, we still aspire for more. We are actually never really truly grateful. So sometimes these things are just reminders, it's not.
Yeah. And I think that's the beauty of this movie and watching movies like this. I mean, I've always liked the kind of movies that leave me kind of quietly walking off and then going through my own thought processes of stuff. And I think that's what Zwigato did. So just kind of also, I'd also watched some of your TED Talks, and I think one of the ones that I watched was on the lack of equity in society, and I was wondering that because and another one I watched which was about actually
anger.
Raising anger.
How do you deal with anger?
I watched when I watched Zwigato, I actually realized that through something like the medium of making a movie, of producing art, how, those two things that you spoke about have actually played out in that movie also, and left people feeling some of those things. So the inequity in society, the fact that sometimes those people aren't seen, and that we have to acknowledge there is a level of privilege. And if you're just born into that, just because there is nothing that you've done to be born where you are. You literally turned up. It was potluck. It was potluck for you. Just even if you don't do anything with it, but at least have that realization about where you are.
Absolutely.
I thought that was such a powerful thing, because sometimes when the subject area feels so big,
yeah,
right, like
what
poverty, I think then you kind of go, I can't, it's like when I remember when my aunt told me, because, I sometimes give money, or she's like, you just can't kind of, you can't just help everyone. And it's just, you're going to kind of have to kind of toughen up a little bit. And everywhere I'd go, I'd always kind of go, oh my God, what, that person just brought me tea, or that person just, and she just literally was just laughing at me. But I just thought, you can become very numb to the fact of where you are. And I think movies like that, and not just movies, plays, reading, watching TED Talks, these moments allow us to stop and just have a moment of acknowledgement of where we are and the privilege that we live in. So I just want to say, thank you for that. Thank you for highlighting that. On some of the kind of activism points that you've really been working on and kind of put your voice towards, one of the things that really kind of struck a chord was your Dark is Beautiful campaign, which I thought was really interesting. Something that I think, like, it's always been one of those things that you hear when you're growing up: don't play outside in the sun. I heard it all the time when I was younger. It will be fine in the winter, but as soon as we're living in England, you don't have a tan in the winter. Sun. But in the summer, everybody's out. Yeah, everyone's out. You're playing on your bike. You've come home, and your grandma's literally, you've walked through the door and said, oh my God, how are we going to get you married? And you just hear those things, and all the time. And you'd kind of grow up kind of going, it's just the way, she doesn't mean anything, or they don't mean anything. But it's kind of that subtle break. But
it's normalized, it's that and that's subtle, dangerous.
Absolutely.
Right.
And I think it's one of those things that we can pass off as a subtle kind of like, a breakdown of people's personas and what their value is. But actually, I think it's far more impactful than what people perceive, because the value system, the beauty system, everything tied up in the fact that you're going to get married, the fact that you might have better opportunities is now going to come to the color of your skin. I think that it's the first time I've ever heard anyone speak about it so kind of profoundly. But I do think since we've had like the rise of social media, I've seen it a lot more, which is fantastic. What kind of made you kind of get behind that campaign or kind of be a voice for that?
So I've been working, like I said, on gender issues for long. And, even when I would talk about equal opportunities or sexism and other things, invariably this would come out from the audience, especially if I was speaking at a college and girls' college or something, and some girl would raise her hand and say, how come you're so confident despite being dark? And I'd be like, wow, it's sort of, and so many people would struggle with those issues, but I never thought it really merited sort of a standalone attention. To be honest, I was completely wrong. And then this organization called Women of Worth from Chennai, who I hadn't heard of, that they even had a campaign called Dark is Beautiful in 2009. It started in 2009. They approached me in 2013 and said, would you support it? And, will you give us a quote and a photograph? And I was like, yeah, anybody doing good work, I'm happy to support, but this is not like my pet project or my pet cause. So I, gave a quote on it and I gave a photo, and suddenly it went viral and I started getting all these media inquiries to talk about colorism. This word wasn't even popular then, And I was like, wow, I just touched a very raw nerve, and it was something that this campaign just needed a face. And considering most actors are light-skinned, and the ones who are dark and dusky are constantly becoming lighter and lighter with every film. So, I can understand that they didn't really have a face to the campaign. So, and I think I started talking about it more and more. And I was initially a little bit hesitant. I was like, listen, I don't want to even identify that as a main thing. Like, of course, there is an issue, but there are many others. In many other ways, we are trapped in the way, this whole beauty norms and how do you define it? It's so narrowly defined and all of that. But I didn't think it was one thing that would really impact so many people at a very deep level. That people would have such low self-esteem, and that they would sometimes not even explore things because they thought they were just not good enough. And in a world where how you look anyway is so important, and the pressure on women is so much more than men. I mean, I'm often told, why do you wear
Absolutely.
glasses? Like, you could easily wear contact lenses. Why don't you wear some makeup? And, why don't your hair is always so frizzy? I mean, we are constantly, I'm told, you're too fat and you're too this and you're too dark and it's just annoying because you don't want to be defining yourself just with that. Again, it's one of those things you're just born into. I didn't do anything to have this nose or
Absolutely.
this hair or this complexion or whatever. I would like to sort of define myself with the work I do, the thoughts I have, the way I behave with people, whatever, my attitudes, etc. But why should I be boxed into that? And while we are making strides in more women are talking about how they feel about things, we are being more vocal, we are entering other male dominated spaces. Yet, if you see, the whitening industry is one of the biggest, it's a growing industry. I mean, all the big international brands have a whitening line. And, you go to a small village in India, whether they have food to eat or not, but they will have a Fair and Lovely cream, which, of course, I want to believe that our campaign had a little bit contribution to making it, fair and glow or whatever it's called now. It's a bit of a superficial change, but at least this conversation has come into the public domain. It
Absolutely.
impacted the rules of the ASI, which is the ASCI, the Advertising Council, so that, they can have stricter rules as to how you define beauty and, those shade cards, like from a darker skin, you can become a lighter skin in whatever by just putting that cream. And it's become now the rich and privileged now can not only have everything else, but they can also buy beauty. Because if you're rich, you can do all kinds of surgeries, so you have an advantage there as well. So if you do not have the means for it, but you still have that desire because the world around you has created that desire, then you're constantly struggling to achieve it. And when you are unable to achieve it, then you're sort of falling in your own eyes. And with social media, with all the filters, you look nothing like your social media profile or your WhatsApp DP. And how do you look at yourself in the mirror? You don't like yourself.
I know.
Because when you're plain and like I am right now with no makeup or, or
Beautiful.
whatever, I mean, how do you make peace with yourself when you don't like what you see?
So
It's,
true.
and I really urge women to, and that's one of the reasons why you need to find what you love doing and, find your interests, your dreams and pursue them, find your mojo,
I think the more that we talk about it and almost can see like how, how built it is on this ideology that nobody lives up to, that you start to go, that doesn't actually even belong to me. And I think it's a really powerful thing to do that. So, thank you for kind of putting your voice to it.
I think the power of
And I
images
think
is so huge that we don't even realize how we are getting impacted by it. When you see light-skinned women everywhere, on hoardings, in magazines, in your television series, in your films. I mean, imagine in a country which is, largely brown, various shades of brown. You are showing me the peach skin constantly. I'm not represented anywhere. And if there are these dark women, then it's about that. Either the dark women have to be so good that they can compensate for their darkness, or they have to be witches, like all the bad characters in television series are darker and, stuff like that. So you stereotype it and you keep reinforcing. In fact, there's a very nice documentary by John Berger, which was done in mid-70s, which is called Ways of Seeing. And it's on YouTube. I would urge everyone to see it.
I need to have it.
Just the power of advertising. And in a way, what is this? This is also advertising. A friend of mine said that, all beauty magazines are there to make you feel ugly because you can never really match up to it. And you're like, wow, wow, they're all so perfect, but you don't know what all goes into making them look like that. Whether it's the makeup, whether it's the surgery, whether it's the lighting, whether it's airbrushing, the Photoshop, all of that, that whole machinery is behind that to make you look not like you. So
I totally agree. And I think it's also that when we talk about it and we normalize talking about it and actually can almost get to when you can get to a place where you can actually go and laugh about a subject and go, oh my God, as if we're going to look at that. When you don't have that and it's just quiet and nobody says anything, right? That's, I think, where the dangerous part is. Like, for example, I remember I went to my aunt's house. We were going to my mum's side, another aunt, and they were all talking amongst them. I must have been about 15. And one of them was talking about their niece, saying, we're looking for a boy. She's studied this, she's, very, this high. And my other aunt from my mum's side, the first question she said, is she fair? Otherwise, there's no point talking about it. That was literally, and I remember sitting there, I think I was about 15. And this is why it's important to speak about it, because you actually realize as a young person, I thought, oh, wow, does that mean that you don't get married then? Like, literally, that is what I thought. I was like, oh, wow, that's the first thing she said. So I just think that by talking about it, you almost burst that taboo. You allow it to kind of go, it's almost like, the emperor's new clothes, he wasn't wearing any clothes. Let's talk about it.
And just people sharing their stories, sometimes
exactly.
it's just
not feeling scared or taboo or like, oh my God.
You're not alone. There are others who are feeling the same way. But our matrimonial ads haven't changed. It's still fair and lovely, homely, convent educated, so.
I'm one of those big believers that the way to, expose anything and to take the power away from stuff is to talk about it. Like I said, once you actually stop giving something power, when we don't talk about it and it's all going on underneath and these little comments and the little creams and the billboards that are going on, but when you talk about it and you actually expose it for what it is, and you're like, it's just, we're being sold something that we don't actually want to be being sold to. That you actually kind of expose it for what it is, and you kind of let go of the power that it holds over society. So I do see there is a kind of change coming on. I've seen a lot more on, on colorism on Instagram. A lot of young Instagrammers coming out with it, which I think is a really, really positive thing.
Well, even the LGBTQ issue. When I did Fire, there was not even a term like this. It was homosexuality and heterosexuality. That's all we had, and you wouldn't even talk about it. Even English journalists, like those who were supposed to be more exposed, wouldn't even use the word gays and lesbians. They would be like, in that kind of a relationship. I mean, I'm of course talking about 26 years ago, but India was in a very different place. It's really those conversations that it triggered, and whether people liked it or not, it's different.
Did you feel that you were making quite a bold kind of move by doing it? Because like you said, it wasn't like, something that, that you'd even kind of hear the word gay in a family conversation.
Well, I did
20 odd years ago.
I did feel it was bold, but I didn't realize how bold it was, because I still came from a liberal family but we didn't really talk about these things. But it wasn't like when the film came out, it wasn't like they were in some shock or whatever. They were like, but it was more an intellectual understanding. I don't think it was an emotional or a truer understanding of it. But I realized how bold it was only when we started being attacked, and there was a policeman standing in front of, outside my home for a month, and then, the theaters were vandalized and all of that. And it triggered so much conversation that artists and journalists and students took to the streets and said, and became more about also freedom of expression and freedom to watch what you want to. I don't know if Fire can be made today despite everything, So in some ways we've become more regressive in ways, and in other ways we are talking so much more about these issues, and there are many more films. There's still fewer than I had imagined. In 26 years, I would have imagined there would be at least 10 good films. At the very least, but not as many. We are still
a lot of work needs to be done.
And we keep taking 2 steps forward and sort of 2 steps backwards.
So thank you so much, Nandita. That has been a kind of whistle-stop tour of your career. I've got to say that you may have not known that you were being bold at the time, but you definitely were. And for a lot of us that were watching those movies, it was quite a kind of almost like a revolution. It was like, wow, there's movies that are made that, you know, highlight the difficulties that people go through, the normalizing things that people usually put on the fringe. So thank you for that.
No,
thank
I realized that it was a landmark film, but you know, when you're doing it, I just did it because I thought it was a powerful story and it hadn't been told. But it's only over the years you realize what it had triggered and what it meant, especially to the community. And you know, and we want to believe that there are some films where you can actually measure the impact. Most films you can't. But I think Fire was one of those films where you could actually see the contribution it had in the conversations, you know, about LGBTQ issues and how it helped in repealing these archaic laws that we had where we criminalized homosexuality and stuff like that. So I'm really grateful and fortunate to have been part of that journey.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And we just have a closing tradition on the show, which is, I always think the gift of hindsight is always a wonderful thing when you look back at something. What is the kind of gift of hindsight or experience? What would you say to your younger self if there was something that you could say?
What should I say?
Or would like to share?
Oh, I mean, I don't regret anything, but I just realized that you know, there's so much more duality in everything. Like nothing is so right or wrong. And, you know, I think when I was younger, I just was more opinionated. I was more judgmental. I had a deeper sense of what's right and wrong and black and white. And as you grow older, you just realize everything is fluid and you start enjoying that ambiguity. You start embracing that ambiguity. So I would tell my younger self that, you know, don't have these binary polarized rights and wrongs and, you know, sort of ideas about things, that embrace those ambiguities, embrace those dualities. But it's something that you only somehow seem to gain with experience. So, you know, the gray hair that had been colored horribly and the glasses and the wrinkles are for a reason. I'm loving the
short hair, by the way.
They are for a reason.
I'm loving the short hair, by the way.
Well, it's terrible today because I don't even know how to do it. And
listen, the Mumbai heat does crazy things to your hair. It really does. It does.
Today was a work day, so I literally ran to home.
Well, you still look absolutely lovely. I've got to say, you are always glowing.
Like we said, you know, we are more than what we look, so it's fine.
Absolutely, absolutely. And thank you so much. That was a beautiful way to end.
Thank you,
I think you're
Angelee.
absolutely right to have a little bit more duality. There is not just always black and white. There can be two parallels that you can learn from. So thank you so much. Thank you so much, Nandita.
Thank you. Thank you for doing this conversation and for letting me share.
Thank you so much.